The book I'm reading is Eldest. It's the second book in the Inheritance series by Christopher Paolini. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but so it's about two boys. One of the boys is Aragon, and he was the main character, the protagonist in the first book. But this book, it changes, and it's about his cousin as well. And it has their different points of view, and it goes between their two adventures. So pretty much it's about how Aragon has to go through his studies and his training to become an even better dragon rider, because in his country there's an evil king who is also a dragon rider, and they're pretty much the only two who have power enough to actually do things with their skills. So he has to train hard enough to become strong enough to defeat King Galbatorix. Roran, on the other hand,
is that the cousin?
Yeah, that's the cousin. He's in his little town, Carvajal, with his village people when the king's men come looking for Aragon. So he's pretty much confused, and they're also looking for him as well. So he's just confused as to why they're looking for him, and eventually him and his people, like his villagers, they fend off the soldiers and the Razak, who are these evil beings who are like crazy. It's kind of scary, like the details that they have sometimes. And so I'm guessing that, I'm inferring that they're going to meet in the near future, or maybe even a while away.
Who's going to meet?
Roran and Aragon.
Okay.
Because usually in books like this, when they're written from two different perspectives, and they have like different chapters for each one, they usually meet up and they show like the different like ideas of how each other is.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that Roran isn't going to be so happy to see Aragon.
Why?
Because in the first book, after their dad, Roran's dad, but Aragon's uncle died from the Razak, who were looking for Aragon still in the first book. Aragon just left with his master in the first book. So I'm guessing that, and it gives clues of his like anger at Aragon in the book. So I'm excited for when they meet. Some parts of this book are really slow, and they the characters tend to stay in one area for a long time, and they don't really do anything that exciting. So it can be kind of boring sometimes.
Okay.
But I'm excited. I keep reading because I'm waiting for it to exceed my expectations that I had from the first book.
Okay.
I'm going to read an excerpt of when Roran is being attacked by the Razak, and because they're looking for Roran, he's also with his fiancée. So they end up. So he's just like in his house, he's sleeping, and then all of a sudden this happens.
Okay.
A thunderclap tore Roran from sleep. Light flared on his face as he struggled to regain awareness. Like a diver desperate to reach the surface, he opened his eyes and saw a jagged hole blasted through the door. 6 soldiers rushed through the yawning cleft, followed by the 2 Razak, who seemed to fill the room with their ghastly presence. A sword was pressed against Roran's neck. Beside him, Katrina screamed and pulled the blankets around her. Up, ordered the Razak. Roran cautiously got to his feet. His heart felt like it was about to explode in his chest. Tie his hands and bring him. As a soldier approached Roran with a rope, Katrina screamed again and jumped on the men, biting and clawing furiously. Her sharp nails furrowed their faces, drawing streams of blood that blinded the cursing soldiers. Roran dropped to one knee and grabbed his hammer from the floor, then planted his feet, swinging the hammer over his head and roaring like a bear. The soldiers threw themselves at him in an attempt to subdue him through sheer numbers, but to no avail. Katrina was in danger, and he was invincible. Shields crumpled beneath his blows. Brigandines and mails split under his merciless weapon, and helmets caved in. 2 men were wounded, and 3 fell to rise no more. The clang and clamor had roused the household. Roran dimly heard horse and his sons, shouting in the hall. The Razak hissed to one another, then scuttled forward and grasped Katrina with inhuman strength, lifting her off the floor as they fled the room. "Roar on!" she shrieked. Summoning his energy, Roran bowled past the two remaining men. He stumbled into the hall and saw that the Razak climbing out a window. Roran dashed toward them and struck at the last Razak, just as it was about to descend below the windowsill. Jerking upward, the Razak caught Roran's wrist in midair and chittered with delight, blowing its fetid breath onto his face. "Yes, you are the one we want." Roran tried to twist free, but the Razak did not budge. With his free hand, Roran buffeted the creature's head and shoulders, which were as hard as iron. Desperate and enraged, he seized the edge of the Razak's hood and wrenched it back, exposing its features. A hideous, tortured face screamed at him. The skin was shiny black, like a beetle carapace. The head was bald, each lidless eye was the size of his fist and gleamed like an orb of polished hematite. No iris or pupil existed. In place of a nose, mouth, and chin, a thick beak, hooked to a sharp point that clapped over a barbed purple tongue. Roran yelled and jammed his heels against the sides of the window frame, struggling to free himself from the monstrosity. But the Razak inexorably drew him out of the house. He could see Katrina on the ground, still screaming and fighting. Just as Roran's knees buckled, Horse appeared by his side and wrapped a knotted arm around his chest, locking him in place. "Someone get a spear," shouted the smith. He snarled, veins bulging on his neck from the strain of holding Roran. "It'll take more than this demon spawn to best us." The Razak gave a final yank, then, when it failed to dislodge Roran, cocked its head and said, "You are ours." It lunged forward with blinding speed, and Roran howled as he felt the Razak's beak close on his right shoulder, snipping through the front of the muscle. His wrist cracked at the same time. With a malicious cackle, the Razak released him and fell backward into the night.
And why did you pick that part to read?
I'm sweating so much.
It's okay.
I chose that excerpt to read because it shows how exciting the book can get at times, but that doesn't really like subdue how boring other parts can be and how slow they can be. It also shows how detailed some of the descriptions can be, and it shows how Roran how much he loves Katrina as well, and how he kind of just like goes crazy if she's in danger.
It really does show how much he loves her, and it's a great example of showing, not telling, in that respect, right? I mean, he never comes out and says this is the love of his life, and he couldn't stand seeing her. You could just tell by the sheer power and how there's that one line where it says Katrina was in danger and he was invincible.
Yeah.
That he became almost superhuman when someone he cared about was in danger. I wanted to ask you about the boring parts. Why do you think the author didn't realize they were writing boring parts, or do you think that there's a purpose for those parts that seem boring to you as a reader? Do they, if you step back and think about it, do they move the story forward in a different way than action does? Do they give you anything as a reader?
Yeah.
Or could you skip them and the story would be the same?
Maybe, because some of the parts, it's because Aragon, the other guy, he has to go through so much training to get to the point where he needs to be. And that, like, his part of the story, I find is less exciting as Roran's.
Okay.
Because he's training, and the training is actually really interesting, but it keeps repeating and it keeps doing the same thing over and over. And so I think it is showing you how long it takes for Aragon to get to the level of experience that he needs to be at.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I'd be interested to hear at the end when you finish it, if at the end you can reflect back and realize maybe why the author set that up. There's things I know I've read in the past where I think, okay, come on already, but then at the end I realize why it was set up that way. Can you make any connections between this book and other things that you've read or films you've seen or other things you know about? Does this seem like anything else?
I saw this, the subject has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
But connecting to my information, my prediction.
Your inference?
In my
Yeah.
inference, If what I think is going to happen happens, then it could be connected to this movie I saw, which is like really good if you want to see it.
Yeah.
It's called Warrior.
Okay.
It's about like UFC fighting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really cool because these two brothers, they kind of split up because their dad was like really bad and he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
So they kind of split up, and the one brother sort of forgave father, but the other one was still like really mad at him.
Okay.
So they at one point they had to fight each other in the competition.
Yeah.
So, and they were like so intense, but they didn't really want to hurt each other.
Right.
But they ended up like getting over it.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I'm thinking that's what.
It would be neat to see. All right. Thank you very much, my dear. Good job.